Time for Sunday school already, guys. Grab those Bibles. Here you go. All right, John chapter 3. We're going to talk, come over here with me. We're going to talk about a great character from the Bible today. You know who it is, Andrew?
Nicodemus.
What? Say it loud.
Nicodemus.
That's exactly right. Nicodemus. John chapter 3. So, Old Testament or New Testament?
New Testament.
And the first books of the New Testament are Matthew, Mark,
Luke,
John. So the first four are the Gospels. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. This is the fourth one. So John chapter 3. So this is about Jesus' life. Start at the beginning of chapter 3 here. So let's see what we got. Read it big and loud for us.
Now there was a man of the Pharisees. His name was named Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews.
So he's a man of the Pharisees and a ruler of the Jews. Is this an important guy or not very important guy in terms of kind of whether he was a big deal? Important guy. He's a ruler. And the Pharisees, sometimes the Pharisees were religious rulers. Sometimes they tried to kind of trick Jesus and find ways that he was breaking the rules. Remember those stories that we've talked about? So he's important, and maybe he's kind of critical of Jesus, right? Keep reading, Harrison.
This man came to Jesus at night and said
Came at night. That's interesting too, right? Why do you think he's coming at night? Why would you go somewhere at night? Why?
So nobody would see him.
Nobody would see him? You think if he didn't want people to see him going to see Jesus? Interesting. What do you think he's going to do?
Talk to.
You think he's going to say nice things to him or not nice things?
Questions.
All right, go ahead, Harrison.
Rabbi, we know that you were a teacher.
Rabbi, so he's addressing him with a term of respect, right? Yeah? Okay. He didn't say, hey, fella. He said, Rabbi. Okay.
Come from God.
We know that you're a teacher, come from God.
For no one can do these signs that can do unless God is with him.
So he says, we've seen the signs that you've done. God is with you. Does Jesus say, why are you coming at night? How come your friends are giving me such a hard time? Is that what he says?
No.
What does he say?
Jesus answered him, truly, truly, I say to you, unless one is born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. Nicodemus said to him, how can a man be born when he is old? Can he enter a second time in his mother's womb and be born second time into his... Jesus answered, truly, truly, I say to you, unless one is born of water and spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of God. That which is born of flesh is flesh, and that which is born of the Spirit is spirit. Do not marvel that I said to you, you must be born again. The wind blows where it is, where it wishes, and you hear its sound, but you do not know where it comes from or where it goes. So it is with everyone who is born of the Spirit.
All right, so Nicodemus comes asking these questions, and Jesus says, truly, truly, which means I'm speaking with you honestly. He talks to him about being born again, and does Nicodemus understand? He's like, wait, what? And so what does he do when he doesn't understand? Does he ask more questions?
Yes.
He asks more questions, and is Jesus answering those questions?
Yes.
He's answering those questions. So Nicodemus comes, maybe critically, maybe not very bravely. He's coming at night, but he comes to Jesus with his questions, and Jesus accepts him and engages him and answers his questions, right? Pick up at verse 16, Harrison. This is another part of what Jesus is telling Nicodemus during this visit.
For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life.
You ever heard that verse before? That's a big one, right? John 3:16. It's one of the most well-known verses, one of the best summaries of the gospel of Jesus from the Bible. And Jesus said this. Who was he talking to? He was talking to Nicodemus, who came to visit him in the dark. And Jesus is just sharing the grace of the gospel with them. Okay, pick up at 17 and read a few more, Harrison.
For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him.
So Jesus is engaging with Nicodemus just the same way that he says is the reason he's come into the world. I did not come into the world to condemn the world. Now, could Jesus condemn the world?
Yes.
Sure could. You tired? He sure could. He could have condemned Nicodemus too. He could have said, you're coming in the dark. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't understand what I'm asking you. You don't understand what I'm telling you. You're not brave enough to come in the daytime. But is that what he does? No, he doesn't do that. He treats Nicodemus with grace. And he tells him what it means to be born again, what it means to receive God's grace. So Jesus says, it's not just the way I'm treating you, Nicodemus. This is my task that my Father has given me, not to condemn the world, but that the world might be saved through me. So, really cool story about Nicodemus visiting Jesus and the way Jesus accepts him. Now, do we know what Nicodemus thinks about what Jesus is telling him here?
No.
We don't really know. We know he's got questions. We know he's brave enough to come talk to Jesus, even though some people might have thought that was a strange thing for him to do. But we also know he's going at night, right? And he's asking some questions, and we're not so sure he understands. But Nicodemus shows up a couple more times in the book of John. So I'm going to go to chapter 7. Harrison, you turn to chapter 19, okay? Chapter 7, this is when there's a group of the religious leaders are thinking about maybe accusing Jesus of doing wrongdoing, and maybe they're not following all the rules and how they're going to bring that forward to Jesus. And Nicodemus, this is John chapter 7, verse 50. Nicodemus, who had gone to him before. Did Nicodemus go to Jesus before? When? That night. He visited him, right? So Nicodemus stands up among some of his friends who are being very critical of Jesus, and they don't really think that he's doing the right thing. But Nicodemus stands up, and they knew that Nicodemus had gone to see Jesus. And Nicodemus was one of them. And he said to them, so Nicodemus is talking to his friends, right? And he stands up right in front of them. And he says, does our law judge a man without first giving him a hearing and learning what he does? He basically says, if we're going to accuse Jesus of doing something wrong, we need to treat him with respect and we need to follow all of our rules. So he's standing up for Jesus, right? Is he doing it in the dark at night?
No.
Is he doing it off in some neighborhood where his friends don't live? No, he's doing it this time right where he lives, right in the light, right in front of his friends, saying Jesus deserves our respect. We need to treat him fairly. And then what do they say to him? They say, are you from Galilee too? Who was from Galilee? Jesus. Galilee wasn't a very impressive place. So they're kind of saying, Jesus is silly. Are you silly just like him? But did Nicodemus stand up and identify with Jesus right there in that difficult moment? He sure did. They said, are you from Galilee too? Search and see that no prophet arrives from Galilee. They're kind of teasing him and making fun of him. So you think, do we know exactly how Nicodemus responds to that? We don't know. Let's look at the one other place that he shows up. Chapter 19, start at verse 39, Harrison. John 19. Now this is towards the end, right? In John 18, Jesus is arrested, and this is when, in John 18, we've looked recently when Peter denied Jesus 3 times. Remember, it was kind of scary. Jesus was headed to the cross, and it was a scary time for people to stand and be with Jesus. In the beginning of chapter 19, Jesus is crucified, and he dies, and then Harrison, 1939.
Nicodemus also, who earlier had come to Jesus by night.
They keep bringing this up, right? And they're like, hey, this is the guy. This is the same Nicodemus. This is the one who made that visit at night with his questions.
Came bringing a mixture of
myrrh,
and also
and aloes. So those are burial spices. Remember when Jesus was dead, some of his friends came and they brought spices to prepare him for the tomb, right?
about 75 pounds in weight.
It's a lot of stuff.
And so they took the body of Jesus and bound it in linen cloths with the spices as in the burial custom of the Jews.
So what's Nicodemus doing? He's helping what? He's helping bury Jesus, and they're doing it according to the custom of the Jews. So he's coming, and they're treating Jesus' body with respect, and they're following their traditions in the way that they're caring for him. Now, do you think people knew they were doing this? Yeah, people knew that they were doing this. Now, what did Peter do during the time that Jesus was being tried and crucified? He was scared to say he was with Jesus, right? Remember those 3 denials? Did Peter deny him, or did Peter stand up? He denied him 3 times. He said, I'm not with him. Oh, this is scary. I'm not with him. But remember, we saw Nicodemus stand up earlier and say, actually, we should do the right thing. And we should pay Jesus respect. And here he comes to Jesus' body as a friend to honor him and to help him, even though it's at a really difficult time. And last time they made fun of him, this time it could be even more dangerous, right? And scary. And just ask Peter. All right, keep going, Harrison.
Now in the place where he was crucified, there is a garden, and the garden knew a new tomb in which no one had yet been laid. So because of the Jewish day, a
day of preparation.
Since the tomb was closed, they laid Jesus there.
So Nicodemus was there after Jesus died and helped prepare him and put him in the tomb. What's it say the next chapter is about?
The resurrection.
The resurrection. When did we celebrate that?
Easter.
On Easter, right. So the story gets a lot happier. But right here, it's difficult. But Nicodemus is there. So Nicodemus, who originally, was he brave or was he not very brave when he went to see Jesus at night? Not very brave. And did he know what he thought about Jesus, or was he not really sure? He wasn't really sure. And then we see him here, where he is bravely helping to bury Jesus after the crucifixion. And you think he's sure of Jesus? He wouldn't be out there if he wasn't sure of Jesus, is what most people think when they look at Nicodemus' life, that he had faith in Jesus and he followed him and he was there. So, a few things we can learn from this story. Did Jesus come to condemn the world? No, Jesus came to save, right? What's the word that starts with G when you get something you don't deserve? Grace. And the story about how Jesus brings grace and salvation to people is another G word called the gospel, the good news, right? So the good news of the gospel of grace, when Nicodemus comes with his questions, and he's got sincere questions, but he may not be all that brave, and he may think it looks kind of silly to come to Jesus. And how does Jesus accept him? With grace, right? Jesus answers his questions, and he becomes one of his followers. So we may think we're not always super brave, and sometimes it may seem silly to come to Jesus for our answers. But Jesus accepts that. And there's stories like Nicodemus. Jesus can even use those small beginnings to lead to brave and strong faith in Jesus, the way that Nicodemus showed later in his life. And that strength, is that ultimately about how great Nicodemus is? Who's it about? It's about Jesus. So Jesus came not to condemn but to save, but he also gives faith as a gift. And he let that seed of faith grow up in Nicodemus' life. You got anything else to say? Nothing? What about you? All right. You guys can get back to reading your books. Say bye.
Bye.
Bye.